To go further into this model, your next slide is going to talk a little bit more about political developments. The Catholic consolidation of Spain is enormous in terms of its consequences. Now, if everything happens for a reason, follow along and see if you can figure out where I'm going with this. We had talked about Islamic invaders coming from North Africa, vaulting over the Strait of Gibraltar and into and halfway up into Spain. Those invaders were called the Moors, M-O-O-R-S, the Moors. They were Islamic in culture and background. It took the Spanish 400 years to finally evict the last of the Moors from the province of Granada and get them kicked back across the Channel to North Africa. Guess which year they were able to finally succeed in this vast task? 1492. Now, if everything happens for a reason, shouldn't it make sense to you to draw some conclusions that the same year that the Spanish are no longer fighting for their own national survival and preservation of their state is also the first year they can finally begin to go beyond their own borders and do some exploration on a transoceanic basis? It takes the mystery out of history if you can make this linkage and connect these events together. The Spanish are now in a position, post-Moorish invasion, to be able to do the things that they may have wanted to do earlier and had interest in doing earlier in terms of economics and trade, but were just simply not in a position to do earlier. If I want to buy a new living room set for my home, it might be nice to make sure that my home was actually built first and not on fire first before I buy the new living room set. First things first, and this is what the Spanish had to do. Isabel of Castile and Ferdinand of Aragon, these two houses, they marry in and they form the Royal House of Spain and unify the Spanish nation state, which leads us then to this notion of monarchs. What the monarchs do at this point in time is we begin to see territories and areas of land that become unified along nationalistic purposes. The idea of a common people with a common heritage following a common governance, which you did not really have in Europe during the Middle Ages. You had loose feudalistic associations, but now you have compact, dynamic nation states, which have the ability now to organize their people, unify their people, and extend their influence in this organized, categorized, rational governmental fashion. The Protestant Reformation then plays the final role that we're going to see in this national process. We had seen with Martin Luther starting during the Middle Ages, you'd seen Martin Luther put up his 95 Theses, protesting some of the things that he thought were wrong with the Catholic Church. It's from this the term Protestant or Protestant is born. These were Christians who were protesting what they saw as being the corruption or the wrongness or the misguidedness of some Catholic Church teachings. The word Catholic, by the way, means universal. You don't have the term universal or Catholic Church show up prior to the Reformation, the Protestant Reformation, because there was just one church. It was the Christian Church. Only after you had this split among Christian churches into Protestants or Protestants, and then the believers who maintain the traditional view of the Christian Church, who call themselves the Universalists or the Catholics, do you begin to have the word Catholic being born. But in response to the Protestant Reformation, you had a large number of nation states in Northern Europe under monarchs who, for political reasons, wanted to break away from the authority of the Church and the Pope, and then for religious reasons wanted to do so as well, and then sought to extend their influence globally for the G for God, expanding their worldview of what God and religion should be around the world as they expanded their own nationalistic desires to expand the G for glory, expand their nation state's realm and power in so many ways. So that sort of then sets us up for the first initial trips that we see of the voyages of exploration that you learned about in grade school and on and on and on. We're not going to have to get into great length into those explorations in terms of the who, the what, the where, the when. We're going to kind of collectivize them a little bit for our purposes, and it'll be more than sufficient. So we're going to transfer from this map to a new map, and I want you to look at the difference. Look at what you're going to see on this map versus what we see here. Aha! Two whole new continents, right? There's a whole new world out there which the Europeans discover. There's a whole series of arrows of exploration going elsewhere that we're going to see. We're not going to name these by name, but what I do want to explore and get into with you is the idea of the two main powers in this initial phase of exploration. The purple on my map represents areas of Portuguese exploration or dominance or sphere of influence. The orange on this map represents the areas of Spanish exploration or dominance or influence. Christopher Columbus set sail as an Italian, financed by Ferdinand and Isabella, Ferdinand of Castile, or Ferdinand of Aragon, Isabella of Castile, and What he is financed to do is to try to find a direct trade route to the West Indies. Obviously, as you know, and as everybody now knows, he never gets there, right? He gets to the Caribbean instead. Although he names the people he meets there Indians, it's pretty apparent to Columbus very early on that these people are not the Indians of India. The name has stuck ever since, but that's not who they were, and even he knew this at that time. Columbus's discovery is one of the most monumental events in human history, short of the agricultural revolution and the advent of the age of Christ. There really are no other greater world events that have transformed the human experience. And by calling it a transformational event, what I mean is that everything after Columbus's discovery on a global basis is going to be different than everything before Columbus's discovery on a global basis. Things will be different here, things will be different here. The world will never be the same again. And so it's an enormously significant event. Now, one of the things that this sets in motion is what we're going to call the Columbian Exchange. And what the Columbian Exchange is this transference of goods, of cultures, of diseases, of social attitudes and values and products between these two worlds that historically had remained kind of separated from each other. Once the Ice Age ends, remember, this floods and fills back in. It's like you've been locked in through this decontamination chamber. These cultures and people here are locked in with whatever showed up over here. There's no going back. And for the Europeans then, and the Asians and the Africans, you see this landmass is going to develop different flora and fauna, different species, different diseases, different immunities than this area here. And so the Columbian Exchange references this all of a sudden reintegration and transference of goods, animals, and products that neither side ever seen before. From the New World to the Old comes potatoes, rice, corn, etc., syphilis. From the Old World to the New comes horses, firearms, slavery, measles, smallpox, an enormous number of, and of course all the livestock that we use today, the cow, if you will, the things that you eat for steak are all European. We're not eating a whole lot of bison or the Native American animals in terms of our beef products. So we see a whole transference of goods back and forth. Along with this come diseases and a lot of social consequences. In many ways, the Europeans are going to be successful in their victory to conquer this new world by waging what you could call unintended biological warfare. They didn't really know they were bringing these diseases over against which the Native Americans would have no natural defense, and you're going to talk mortality rates here in fantastic pandemic proportions. Easily the largest pandemic wipeouts that we've really seen in human history, up to a 90%, 95% die-off rate for the people here over the next 400 years as they're exposed to diseases for which they had no immunity and died at a fantastic rate. So when you see these two areas on the map here, notice how most of the Portuguese concentration of exploration is going to be in the Old World, Africa and Asia, and the Spanish concentration is going to be predominantly in the New World, North and South America. There's a reason why this was codified in this managerial sense. The issue was this: both Spain and Portugal are Catholic nations. And we're at a time of the Protestant Reformation, the Crusades are just ended, but you still got Europe really not on good terms with the people of the Middle East in general, still wanting someday to try to secure that Holy Land back, even though they never will. The Pope, for his part, did not want to see two nation states that were both Catholic warring with one another. There were enough other people on the planet to fight as far as the head of the Catholic Church was concerned. And Spain and Portugal, therefore, asked the Vatican to act as sort of a fair bargaining arbitrator to divide both nations' global claims. This would be the papal demarcation line of 1493, which was then extended a bit westward in the Treaty of Tordesillas of 1494. The idea was to, at the stroke of a pen, neatly take the world and bisect it. And the Pope essentially said that we're going to divide this so you don't have this kind of internal conflict between loyal Catholic nations. The European, or the Spanish, were going to be reserved to have exploration and territorial claims in areas to the west of this line, and the Portuguese would have areas to the east. The Treaty of Tordesillas moves the line a couple hundred miles further to the west at the behest of the next year at the request of the Portuguese, which encompasses their settlement of modern-day Brazil. By the way, linkage, it's no coincidence. Modern-day Brazil, their native language is Portuguese. That's the essential, historical background that we see for these people in terms of that cultural linguistic preservation. On to your next slide here is we're going to emphasize not what we see in the Old World, but in the New. Let's focus on Spanish conquest and exploration here in the New World. And notice the term. The term is conquistadors, which is loosely translated conqueror, conquerors. That's important. Language tells you something. They're not called exploradors. They're not called let's make friends and be nice-adors. They're not called come and meet new people-adors. They're called conquistadors, conquerors. The Spanish gold, glory, and God were there for very specific purposes to advance and extend the Spanish nation state. Hernan Cortez, for his part, arrives in Mexico and basically goes to war with and enslaves the Mexican nation state, the Aztec nation state at this point in time, destroys Tenochtitlan, and on it builds modern-day Mexico City. Pizarro, De Soto explore the American Southwest and Southeast respectively. Coronado works his way up as far as modern-day Colorado. And you've got all this exploration going on as they extend what they call New Spain, this new region here they're going to try to compartmentalize and make part of their empire. So it's a colony per se, but it's going to be a fully integrated part of the Spanish overall nation state. That's the intention. And the models of Spanish control were after conquest and warfare to engage in a system of social economics that involved land transfers and transfers of people. As I said, slavery is something that's going to arrive with the Spanish to the New World. First of which was the so-called encomienda system, whereby large tracts of land in the New World were commended or granted to Spanish nobles, Spanish landlords, if you will. The land was granted to them along with the persons currently existing on it. So when the Spanish showed up in force to then occupy and claim this land, which they sort of had no title to, but were doing it anyway, they would show up in force and then proceed to directly enslave the people on it, feeling that they had the authority of their crown to do so. Now, as we mentioned earlier, the Native Americans did not make the best slaves for the long haul. First of all, they knew the area, they knew the language, they could always flee to sympathetic tribes further westward, but most importantly, they died. They died in droves, and so you had a labor shortfall for what Spain really wanted. So as a result of this, they later shifted to the Asiento system, which was the transmigration of Africans over to the New World to serve as slaves in the model the Native Americans could not serve in. Now with their arrival, what the Spanish are looking for, God and gold we said, or God and glory we said, but also gold. They don't find an enormous amount of gold, a fair amount, but what really and truly enriches Spain is silver. The massive shipments of silver that return to Spain make the Spanish the envy of Europe. And every major colonial player beyond this point who wants to get into the game wants to kind of access to that New World ATM machine in the way that they've seen the Spanish do. So they're all coming in many ways with that in mind, no matter what their other subsidiary intentions are in many ways. We can kind of conclude then in some ways with English, French, and Dutch colonial claims, which will sort of end our first lesson here. As we said, other players want to get into this game, specifically the Spanish, or the British and French, the English and French. John Cabot, working for the English, is going to try to secure claims to the Canadian coast in many ways, Newfoundland, and try to work his way up and into Canada. Walter Raleigh is going to establish a colony for the British at Roanoke, which is going to fail and everyone there is going to die. And you're also going to see under Henry Hudson, for the Dutch, is going to claim Hudson River, Hudson Bay, and all this northern area for the Dutch. This is not going to last long, but that's going to be their claim. And he's seeking for something. The only other thing besides gold that was so desired was the so-called Northwest Passage. For the next 400 years, a dream that's not going to die until Lewis and Clark in 1803, or 1804 rather, for the next 400 years, a major European dream is going to be to find what Columbus was originally looking for. A straight shot, a direct route, somehow across from here to there. That's going to be a dream that no one knows can't be met until about 300 or 400 years later. But that was what Hudson was looking for as he worked his way up and found Hudson Bay, was trying to find that passage to Asia, which does not exist. Champlain and de La Salle, working for the French as Frenchmen, colonize or lay claim to the Mississippi Basin. They're going to lay claim to the Mississippi Basin, the Ohio River Valley, and claim the central areas of the continent for themselves. And I do have one quick thing to show you in that line. As we said, you've got to sum up this and review in many ways. The Portuguese settlements here of modern-day Brazil. Spain was going to settle the vast area of the New World and calling it New Spain and New Granada respectively, as well as Florida and the Caribbean, working their way up as far as Colorado and California. Understand that even today, this part of the United States has been under Spanish or Mexican control longer than it's been part of the United States, by a good 100 years still, 100 to 150 years. It gives you some sense of our cultural background and who we are. The British, for their part, as we said, were going to make claims to the Canadian territory, the Hudson Bay areas, which would compete with the Dutch in those claims. They would also compete with the Dutch on the Atlantic coast. And the French, for their part, are going to claim the vast interior of this continent. Now, what these groups are going to do with these things and how this is going to shake out as the Native Americans increasingly find themselves on their heels or off balance, that's a story for our next lesson, which is going to deal more specifically with the integration of these New World areas more into full formal European control. Welcome aboard. We finished lesson 1, and we'll see you for lesson 2 at your convenience. Thank you.